Hi, welcome to Bagel's Binder, where we collect paper. This video is rated B for beginner, as it covers some absolute fundamentals of the game that most intermediate or advanced players will already know. When you're playing Magic, you will often see cards that refer to something called a permanent. Now, permanents, as the name would imply, are anything that would stay out on the field until something else would remove it, whether it is itself that removes it via something like sacrificing, or something that would get rid of it, like murder, or go for the throat, which would destroy a creature. Your most common examples of these would be your lands, your creatures, enchantments, artifacts, and your planeswalkers, all of which we will be going over a little bit in detail. At this point, you probably already know what lands are, but we'll cover them anyways, as essentially lands are what you use to create different energy or mana. They're kind of similar to batteries, where each different land will produce a different type of voltage. For example, your mountains might produce the energy equivalent of a 9 volt, while your plains will produce a AA battery. They're both equally useful, but will have different uses. Then you have your creatures, which are probably the most prominent permanent that are used to win the game. They stand out because they have a distinguished power and toughness down in the bottom right. Next, you have your enchantments. Now, these are permanent magical effects that have some usually overarching effect. These are also further broken into your enchantments and then your auras. Now, auras are considered enchantments, but auras specifically attach to a permanent, a creature, or a player, and they will say on the card what they attach to. From there, they will continue to provide whatever the passive magical effect is. So, for example, this could give your creature flying, and whenever it enters, you draw a card. Otherwise, enchantments will just stay out on the field, separate from your creatures. Then you have your artifacts. Now, these are somewhat similar to enchantments, as they also just stay out on the field, and they can also be given to creatures using equip, which is different than auras, where they enter and attach to it. Equipment usually requires you to pay a little bit extra to give it to a creature. Another difference between equipments and auras is that if a creature who is enchanted with an aura dies, the enchantment dies with them. You know, that creature is magical now. They have whatever that enchantment is. Whenever they die, so does the enchantment. Artifacts and equipments as an extension, however, don't have that effect. If a creature is holding a sword and they die, they will drop the sword and it can be re-equipped to another creature, unless stated otherwise. Even though they're both permanents, artifacts and enchantments stand out even further, with artifacts usually having some sort of cost associated with using them, while enchantments will often provide a passive effect, though of course there are a lot of exceptions to this. Lastly, among the most popular permanents are Planeswalkers. Now, I know looking at this seems really intimidating. They have a lot of words and a lot of weird things, but trust me, they get a lot easier once you get used to them. Once per turn, you can use one of the abilities listed here, but they usually have a cost associated with them. For example, these two abilities here will reduce their loyalty as it uses their power. It weakens them a little bit. This one, however, is something they're willing to do, and the more often they're able to do it, the more willing they are to help you. The more willing they are to do some further effects, or willing to put up with more of these things that draw back. And once that loyalty reaches 0, they leave and go to the graveyard. When I started playing, people always said that they were like another player, but that's not quite accurate. If you hear that, it's a little disingenuous and confusing. They're easier to compare to a companion or a teammate, where their counters down here, this little number in the bottom right, that infers how loyal they are to you and how willing they are to help. Now, what people always meant when they said that was that you could target them whenever you are attacking. So for example, if I wanted to attack you and you had your Liliana, I could instead say, I want to attack your Liliana. And if my creature dealt damage to her, she would lose loyalty equal to the amount of damage she took. So if she took 2 damage, she would lose 2 loyalty. To wrap this all up, we have non-permanents, which are very simple, as they are just temporary effects or magical spells. For example, Shock, probably one of the simpler non-permanent spells to understand, as when you cast it, the effect resolves, and then the non-permanent spell goes to the graveyard. They are things that are used up. Same would apply to this, which is just a sorcery. They get cast, they produce their effect, and then they go to the graveyard. Those are just non-permanents, things that have an effect and then leave. And that should be just about everything you need to know about the absolute basics of permanence and non-permanence. There are more permanents I didn't cover because there are so many different cards that have been released over the past 30-some years that it would be a much longer video if I tried to cover all of them. So instead, I'll leave you with these absolute basics. If you enjoyed this video or learned anything new at all, consider subscribing. Our goal is to try and teach more people about their favorite hobbies or introduce them to new ones. Also, feel free to consider checking me out on all these platforms where I typically just play games. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to sleeve your cards.